Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel, and welcome to day 2 of our Halloween Spooktacular. In today's video, I have Bradley with me, and we are going to be reading Happy Haunting Amelia Bedelia. So we're going to get right into it and read this Halloween story. Happy Haunting Amelia Bedelia. I like the purple with the bats. It looks really cool. Okay. Happy Haunting Amelia Bedelia. When Amelia Bedelia arrived for work, she could not believe her eyes. "Oh my gosh," said Amelia Bedelia. "What happened to the house?" "This is terrible," said Amelia Bedelia. "Mr. and Mrs. Rogers must need me. Someone has ruined their house." She ran to the front door. "Ah!" yelled Amelia Bedelia. "Help!" Mr. and Mrs. Rogers rushed outside. "Hold still," said Mrs. Rogers. "I'll get the bats out of your belfry." "Ha!" said Mr. Rogers. "That would be a full-time job." "She has made me bats for years." "You are untangled, Amelia Bedelia," said Mrs. Rogers. "Come inside and relax." "Wow," said Amelia Bedelia. "Who wrecked your house?" "We did," said Mrs. Rogers. "We are getting ready for Halloween." "Is that tonight?" said Amelia Bedelia. "How did you forget?" said Mr. Rogers. "Those bats on the front porch must have made you batty." "Sorry," said Amelia Bedelia. I have been very busy. I was at school helping children make their costumes." "Good for you," said Mrs. Rogers. "We've invited all of our neighbors for our Halloween party, and you too, tonight. The best costume wins a prize." "Gosh," said Amelia Bedelia. "Your house looks so spooky." "Thank you, Mrs. Rogers. The spookier the better." "That's the idea," said Mr. Rogers. I have no idea what that is. Tickets? Streamers? Oh, no. "What fun," said Amelia Bedelia. "I will help you clean up." "No, you don't," said Mr. Rogers. "I worked hard to get this place looking shabby." There it is again. I think it was streamers. "Then I will help you mess up," said Amelia Bedelia. "What should I do first?" "Hand me that hammer," said Mr. Rogers. "But first, crack a window. It's gotten very warm in here." "Uh-oh." Crash! "Uh-oh," said Amelia Bedelia. "I tried to just crack it, but it broke instead." "Broke the window, Bradley." "Amelia Bedelia," said Mr. Rogers. "I meant open the window a bit." "It is open," said Amelia Bedelia, "but there's a lot of bits and pieces." Uh-oh. "It's not your fault, dear," said Mr. Rogers. "Besides, that broken window makes our house look truly haunted." Mr. Rogers shook his head and said, "I think you've both gone batty." "What is next?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Let's see," said Mrs. Rogers. "A lot of people are coming tonight. We should add a leaf to the table." "A leaf?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Yes, of course," said Mrs. Rogers. "A leaf or two makes the table larger." "Do you know where to find the leaves?" "Of course I do," said Amelia Bedelia. Oh, sounds like she's gonna get in trouble again, Bradley. "Before you go," said Mr. Rogers, "please hand me that witch." "That witch what?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Not what," said Mr. Rogers. "Witch." "Witch what?" said Amelia Bedelia. "Not witch what," said Mr. Rogers. "That witch there with the pointy hat." Amelia Bedelia held up two witches. "They both have pointy hats," she said. "Which witch do you want?" "Whichever," said Mr. Rogers. "No, I mean whatever witch." "Witch? Oh, skip it. Just get those leaves." Amelia Bedelia skipped away. Oh gosh, she's funny, isn't she, Bradley? "Good thing it's fall," said Amelia Bedelia. "I can get lots of leaves for the table." She saw something wiggle under her leaf. "Sorry, Mr. Worm, but back you go," she said. "Yoo-hoo!" called Mrs. Rogers from the kitchen window. "There's no time to do yard work. I need your help." Amelia Bedelia went inside. "There we go," said Amelia Bedelia. Now the table looks smaller to me, but it's so much prettier." Mrs. Rogers always has great ideas. Amelia Bedelia went into the kitchen, so she put leaves on the table instead of the leaf. "There you are," said Mrs. Rogers. "You are so creative with food. Let's cook up some gruesome goodies." "Goodies," said Amelia Bedelia. "This worm casserole needs more spaghetti. Cranberry juice makes a tasty vampire punch. Crumble up cookies for a kitty litter cake. We need more eyeballs. I'll peel another bunch of grapes. Dried apricots make delicious ears." Those are some spooky good foods. There was a knock at the kitchen door. "Trick or treat," said cousin Alkalu. "I do not know any tricks," said Amelia Bedelia, "but you can sample some treats." "Thank you," said cousin Alkalu. Mr. Rogers walked into the kitchen. "Something smells good," he said. "Well, it sure isn't me," said cousin Alkalu. I've been working very hard. I harvested a load of pumpkins for the party tonight. How generous, said Mr. Rogers. Do you know how to carve jack-o'-lanterns? I did one, said Cousin Alkaloo. He showed them this pumpkin. The face looks very familiar, said Amelia Bedelia. Mrs. Rogers tried not to laugh. Very funny, said Mr. Rogers, but that pumpkin is too handsome. Have you got anything scarier? Wait here, said Cousin Alkaloo. He went out to his truck. See, he made the pumpkin look like Mr. Rogers. Cousin Alkaloo returned with the scariest scarecrow ever. Meet Oswald, said Cousin Alkaloo. He scares away the birds for miles. Ooh, said Mrs. Rogers. He sends shivers down my spine. Oswald can sit here for tonight. He doesn't scare me, said Mr. Rogers. I don't know the meaning of the word fear. You don't, said Amelia Bedelia? The word fear is in the dictionary. I will look it up for you. Show me later, said Mr. Rogers. I must get my costume ready. I'm going to be a circus strongman. And I'm going to be a queen, said Mrs. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia, what is your costume going to be? What do you think she's going to be? Gee, said Amelia Bedelia, I do not have a costume. Sure you do, said Mr. Rogers. You wear a costume every day. Mrs. Rogers glared at her husband. What do you mean, said Amelia Bedelia. These are my clothes, not a costume. I have always dressed like this. Mr. Rogers felt bad about what he had said. He was too embarrassed to say anything. Uh-oh. Come along, Amelia Bedelia, said Mrs. Rogers. I have an idea for you. And for Cousin Alkaloo. See you tonight, said Mr. Rogers. Amelia Bedelia did not reply. Ooh. Oh, Doctor Who. Ooh-wee. That's not what it says, but creak. Clankety clank, clunch, aye! That night, as darkness fell, the house really did look haunted. Spooky music with scary sounds made it even more fun. Floorboards creaked, chains rattled, moans and groans filled the air. The doorbell rang. Our first trick-or-treater, said Mrs. Rogers. Would you get the door, dear? Yes, your majesty, said Mr. Rogers. As soon as he was out of sight, Mrs. Rogers ran to the back door, and while Mr. Rogers handed out treats at the front door, Mrs. Rogers let in a trick at the back door. Ooh. Right this way, said Mr. Rogers. Thank you, said a skeleton. I was dying to come in. He's a skeleton. The party food was a big hit. Care for an eyeball, said a girl to her dad. Yuck, he said. Yum, she said. They are good and disgusting. Try some finger food, said Mr. Rogers. Oh, cool, said the boy. These cookies have little fingers. They were Amelia Bedelia's idea, said Mr. Rogers. Where is she? Asked the boy. Good question, said Mr. Rogers. May I have 2 cups of blood? Asked a girl. My pleasure, said Mrs. Rogers. I love your costumes. Amelia Bedelia helped us, said a little boy. Wonderful, said Mrs. Rogers. Maybe you will win a prize. Have you seen Amelia Bedelia? Asked Mr. Rogers. Not yet, said Mr. Rogers. She might not come, thanks to you. Oops, that was the wrong voice. Oops. What did I do wrong, said Mr. Rogers. You know, said Mrs. Rogers. You made fun of her clothes. I feel terrible, said Mr. Rogers. I will apologize when I see her. Just then, Mr. Rogers shuddered. What's wrong, said Mrs. Rogers. It sounds silly, said Mr. Rogers. The scarecrow just gave me the creeps. Scaredy cat, said Mrs. Rogers. It looks alive, said Mr. Rogers. I feel like it's watching me. Uh-oh, maybe it is. Ding dong. Mr. Rogers jumped. Relax, said Mrs. Rogers. You're imagining things. Go and see who is at the door. Mr. Rogers opened the door. He smiled a big smile. Well, well, he said. I've never been so glad to see a ghost. Do come in, Amelia, Miss Ghost. Ooh, said the ghost as it floated into the house. Mr. Rogers was a perfect host. Care for a refreshment, he asked. The ghost shook its head no. Well, said Mr. Rogers, would you like to judge our costume contest? The ghost nodded yes. Uh-oh. Wonder who the ghost is. Attention, everyone, said Mrs. Rogers. It's time for a Halloween contest. Anyone who wishes to compete for a prize, step right this way. Oh, look, there's a pickle and... I can't really tell what that is. I'm Sunny Day, your television weatherman. I forecast that I will win. You can't beat peace and love. This hippie has the grooviest t-shirt and bell bottoms around. Bell bottoms. Oh, that's so cool. Oh, that's so funny. If I win, I shall be in a pickle. I will still be in a pickle. In a pickle? I am all eyes. And she's eyes. I'm all ears. And all ears. Oh, that's cool. And I am right under your nose. Oh, that one's cool. Bravo, said Mr. Rogers. Yes, said Mr. Rogers. I can tell that Amelia Bedelia helped them a lot. Too bad she could not be here tonight. He winked at Mrs. Rogers. Just then the clock struck 10. Okay, everyone, said Mrs. Rogers. Time to take off your masks. Uh-oh, said the ghost. It tried to slip away. Whoa there, said Mr. Rogers. It's time to put my foot down. Mr. Rogers stepped on the sheet as the ghost kept walking. The sheet was pulled off to reveal... Cousin Uncle Lou, said Mr. Rogers. Where is Amelia Bedelia? Cousin Uncle Lou looked very afraid. He pointed behind Mr. Rogers. He opened his mouth to speak, but was scared speechless. Mr. Rogers wheeled around. Boo! Screamed the Scarecrow. Yay! Yelled Mr. Rogers. He threw his barbell up in the air. Mr. Rogers turned around and ran right into Cousin Uncle Lou. They both fell in a heap. Oh, who's the Scarecrow then? If that's Cousin Uncle Lou, I wonder who it is. Who is it, Bradley? Happy Halloween, said Amelia Bedelia. Amelia Bedelia, said Mr. Rogers. Ha ha, said Cousin Uncle Lou. I think you should call her Amelia Boo-delia. Oh, good. Oh, that's so fun. Good job, Amelia. As your queen, said Mrs. Rogers, I declare Amelia Bedelia the winner for the best costume. The next day, Amelia Bedelia and Cousin Uncle Lou came to help clean up. Great party, said Cousin Uncle Lou. Thank you, said Mrs. Rogers. We will do it again next year. Start planning your costume now. I will, said Amelia Bedelia. But you have the best ideas. Those trick-or-treaters, said Mr. Rogers. Somebody piled leaves on our table. That was me, said Amelia Bedelia. That was lovely, said Mrs. Rogers. They made a beautiful centerpiece. Mrs. Rogers showed Amelia Bedelia how to add a leaf to the table. There we go, said Mrs. Rogers. Now let's set the table for lunch. Amelia Bedelia, said Mr. Rogers. I apologize for what I said yesterday. Apology accepted, said Amelia Bedelia. Try some leftover warm casserole. Mr. Rogers took a huge portion. It's very tasty, he said. Glad you like it, said Amelia Bedelia. I got worried yesterday when I ran out of spaghetti. You ran out? Asked Mr. Rogers. He took a closer look at his food. Then, what is this? Said Mr. Rogers. Lucky me, said Amelia Bedelia. Each leaf I picked up in your yard had a fat, juicy worm under it. Mr. Rogers turned as green as a witch. Trick or treat, said Amelia Bedelia, laughing. Did you like that book, Bradley? Yeah, it was a fun story. I really liked that one. It's quite long, so sorry guys, but it was a good book, wasn't it? I hope you guys enjoyed reading a Halloween book with us today, and we can't wait to see you guys back tomorrow for day 3 of our Halloween Spooktacular. We'll see you guys in another video. Bye guys! And now for the riddle portion of the video. So yesterday's riddle was, what was hallowing and yellowing all night long? Did you say cat? Wrong. And the answer was the wind. And the people who got it right were Sally Wild, Michelle Sabot, Amanda Carlton, and Dal's Parts by Brandy. So congrats to you guys for answering it correctly. And now for today's riddle, it wraps you in its ghostly arms, a gray and clammy thing, yet if you move it lets you go and never says a thing. So what is that? So I hope you guys are enjoying these riddles, and yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow for another riddle and another video.